The first aspect of being an audiophile is finding music you love, which affects you profoundly. The second is supporting artists who are creative. And the third aspect is discovering headphones and IEMs that show different ways of enjoying your content. There are many headphones lost to the grinding sands of headphone release cycles, reviewer hype, and quick abandonment, and the overwhelming number of hi-fi alternatives in the market. There is, among many good but forgotten headphones, one that I want to briefly talk about today. It is the Fostex TH-500rp. This headphone is discontinued but can still be found if you're patient. It's planar magnetic. When it was released back in 2014 or 2015, it cost $700. Now, with its limited availability, the used market cost can fluctuate between $350 and $600. And I think, despite some of its shortcomings, the 500rp is a brilliant headphone if you can find it. Instead of my usual review process, I'm going to touch on a few categories that I think make the 500rp stand out. Yeah, we'll talk about the sound later, but it's the entire package that makes me like what I have here. So, what's different? In a market where there are dozens of planar magnetic options, from audeze, monolith, hi-fi man, meze, Dan Clark, mods for the T40rp, T50rp, and the T60rp, and all sorts of stuff from China, surely everything has already been covered. I don't think so. Let's talk build first. Planar headphones, as a general rule, tend to be pretty large. Audeze's LCD series is cumbersome and heavy. Monolith stuff is cumbersome, heavy, and has a headband design that places too much pressure on the top of the head while not really securing the headphone. Hi-Fi Man isn't particularly comfortable, and their quality control continues to be abysmal. Of course, this issue doesn't apply to every planar headphone. Sennheiser Audio, for example, makes sturdy, small, and arguably more comfortable options. And Audeze's LCD-1 is very compact and still has some fit and build problems, but is at least designed for mobile use. When I look at the 500rp, however, I see a large headphone that outclasses even the modern smaller rivals in build and comfort. The 500rp is made of aluminum, but is very light. It weighs just about as much as the Hi-Fi Man Sundara, but the 500rp has ear cups that swivel for a more contoured fit, something Hi-Fi Man doesn't seem to grasp. The 500rp actually has soft headband padding, something, again, that Hi-Fi Man and audeze don't include in their large headphone designs. The 500rp has medium clamping force. It's lighter than the HD6XX and Sundara, but more firm than the monolith M1070 and M1570. Comfort, in other words, is superb on the 500rp. That's a running theme among the various reviews on this headphone. Another aspect that's different from the litany of alternatives is that the 500rp has an attached 10-foot cable. And I hate that. It forces me to use this headphone at home, and frankly, I'd love to take this headphone out without the hassle. But the cable is braided, and very importantly, it transmits no audible microphonics, which is something I cannot say often for other gear. Possibly the least important but still somewhat relevant aspect is the 500rp's appearance. It is, I think, unique. There's nothing else in the market that is similar. Now, Audeze's large planar headphones all pretty much have the same design philosophy. So do Hi-Fi Man's. Monoliths make some superficial differences in theirs. The T40 and T50 could be mistaken for each other. So you kind of get the idea. I want to talk a little bit about the 500rp sound signature. Now, Fostex wasn't particularly helpful in their marketing. They say that this headphone has, quote, stunning high-resolution sound with sparkling highs, rich midtones, and high-quality lows. Reviewers said that the 500rp was smooth, had a balanced sound, recessed mids, the treble was rolled off. The handful of frequency response graphs show kind of an M-shaped signature. I've had the 500rp for years and have used it with all of my amps. This includes the Burson 3XR, Brooklyn DAC Plus, Matrix Mini-I Pro 3, RV80i2, Felix Euphoria and Echo, Hafler HA75 DAC, Mastrop 789, Gustard 816, well, the list goes on. I've used this headphone for streaming music, watching movies, editing my videos, and of course dusting off the test playlist for this video. In my opinion, the 500rp does have a sub-bass roll-off. It's not anemic, and is not like the experience that you might get with the HD800S. On the other hand, mid-bass I think is close to neutral. Drum impacts are hard, impactful, but not piercing. They sound more like thud rather than a sharp thwack. There's also, surprisingly, not great separation between sub-bass and mid-bass. The 500rp tends to meld the two together, creating a somewhat muffled sound. Perturbations in bass recorded into Mountains and the Sicario soundtrack were very difficult to parse out on this headphone. Comparatively, the HD6XX has slightly more resolving, clearer bass. This result is not typical of planar headphones. Audeze's LCD headphones, the Sundara, Monolith's headphones, they all have more clarity and separation in the bass than the 500rp, and of course more than the HD6XX. The mids are clear, particularly vocals, which stand about 1 to 2 steps ahead of other elements. The drums never vie for attention, but are clearly present in the mix. The 500rp accentuates vocal sibilance and grain. When I compare it against the Audeze LCD2 Classic and the LCD XC, the 500rp seem to have similar rendition in this regard. Individual mid-centric elements are fairly easy to hear, but no more so than what I can hear on the LCD2 Classic and the XC. The treble, I think, is close to neutral. It never gets harsh or piercing. Yeah, there is a mid to upper treble roll-off, which becomes apparent around 15 kHz. I never got the impression that the treble was muted or muffled. In Scherzo for X-Wings, for example, I had no trouble hearing the group sets, the gravelly natures of the brass and horns, and the placement of the instruments on one side or the other. In this respect, the 500rp is similar to the Avantone Planar, which has a marginally clearer and slightly more neutral rendition. In contrast, the LCD2 Classic and XC have a treble emphasis around the upper treble, but don't really sound all that much clearer than the 500rp. Detail retrieval on the 500rp is about average, or slightly above average. While the bass is muted and not particularly clear, the mids and treble provide more detail than what the HD6XX does, and the HD6XX is my standard measure for detail retrieval in my New Light footstep test. Speaking of which, the 500rp rendered 8 clear footsteps. This is the same number of steps I hear on the LCD2 Closed and the Classic. The Avantone Planar and Hi-Fi Man Sundara rendered 10 to 11, if you want to compare. As for soundstage, I'd say that it's wider than the HD6XX and LCD1, but not quite as wide as the Sundara. The 500rp's soundstage is similar to that of the LCD2 Classic. Overall, I don't think I would call the 500rp balanced sounding. I think it's more dark, more intimate than what I consider a balanced tuning. When it comes to performance, if the 500rp was being sold today, I'd say you've got better options in the market. For $700, you can find alternatives, both dynamic and planar, that outclass the 500rp in clarity, detail, soundstage, and separation. But a headphone is more than measurements and technical abilities. The overall presentation, how it interacts with your music, and how it makes you appreciate your content has a bigger long-term impact. This is exactly why I could not recommend the Harmonic Tyne Zeus, but bought one during the review process. I just fell in love with the sound signature. Sadly, Harmonic Tyne copied and pasted that sound into their more expensive Poseidon, and I wasted money on that headphone. I've got plenty of gear. I've got far too many options. In fact, so many that there are long periods when I don't use a given headphone. My tastes change weekly. Sometimes I want my LCD2 pre-phasor. Other times I want the clarity of my Austrian audio gear. And on a few occasions, I have brought down the headphone to work out my neck muscles. I've tried selling the 500rp a few times, and I just can't do it. I love the sound. Maybe the bass should be clearer and more detailed. Maybe the sibilance could be reduced. Maybe the soundstage might be a little bit wider. But when I listen to the headphone for more than 20 minutes, I get lost in my experience. With the 500rp, I experiment regularly with high output impedance sources, such as my OTL2 amps and my Hafler HA75 DAC. The 500rp doesn't need a nuclear power plant either. For example, I have to run the Burson 3XR in low gain with the 500rp so that I don't blow my eardrums. Ultimately, what I'm saying is that the TH-500rp is a terrible headphone compared to modern gear, if all you're looking for is technical performance. But if overall enjoyment is the issue, then the 500rp for me is amazing. I have to put it in the same category as my Zeus, AudioQuest Nighthawk, LCD2 Pre-Phasor, and ZMF Icon, all headphones that do not live up to technical performance comparisons and are overpriced in that respect. But each and every single one brings me immense happiness when I use them. There you go, my very subjective opinion about a headphone. I love the TH-500rp despite its shortcomings, and it's as much a collector's item now as any audiophile equipment could be.